for joining us for NACVA's YouTube Live. This installment will be discussing the area of specialization, business interruption and lost profits. I'm Brian Jones, Chief Operations Officer and Executive Vice President for the NACVA, joined today by two of NACVA's experts who specialize in business interruptions and lost profits. We have Kerrie Merrifeld with Axiom Forensics. She's headquartered out of Texas. Also, Robert Carter with Hertzbaugh and Company out of the Maryland area. Robert is currently serving on NACVA's Standards Board. Kerrie is currently chairing NACVA's Litigation Forensics Board, but in their practice, specializing in business valuation, financial litigation, and financial forensics, they've developed a series of training related to business interruptions and lost profits, and we'll spend a few moments with them today talking about this area of specialization. Hi, Robert and Kerrie. Good afternoon for you where you are.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Brian. Good afternoon.
Yeah. So why don't we begin, let's say, Kerrie, speaking about this particular niche and the kinds of services that valuation and forensics analysts can provide to clients who are dealing with business interruption and lost profits. Set the stage a bit about what kind of help they need and the circumstances that land them in this need for this kind of support.
Well, today, as we see, we have tons of fires like out in California, or we have floods, or we have earthquakes. When all these natural disasters happen, there's a lot of businesses that get either partially or fully interrupted from being able to operate and to make money. So in that case, business owners have business interruption loss, business insurance that covers these losses in the time period to build back up. So we are here to work with the public adjusters or the attorney and calculating the actual business interruption loss and lost profits that the business suffers to be able to get them a settlement to get them back up and running.
Mm-hmm. So Robert, you mentioned public adjusters, the owners themselves. What are some of the other stakeholders that you deal with these kind of engagements and the specialized support or services that are needed for each of those individuals involved in this type of engagement?
So in terms of the stakeholders, you kind of hit on the main people, but you're right that it does involve a number of other individuals. Sometimes you're dealing with somebody who specializes in machinery, equipment, determining how long things are going to be in repair, whether they can be repaired, what the timelines might be for a company to get up and running. Obviously, in our role, we typically are dealing more with the financial impacts, but we can't determine how long things will be out of service or how long till a company can be up and running again. That's an assumption that's given to us. So it's very common that we'll be relying on other experts and other people that are involved in that have some expertise related to the type of damage and also what needs to be done to get a company up and running again.
Mm-hmm. We've got a couple questions, so I'll pose these to you, Robert. Can you discuss the differences between ISO policy and manuscript policy, and what is ISO?
So essentially what you're dealing with, the ISO is essentially the standard policy that exists. So if you're dealing with this type of work, you're going to ask for the policy that's in place. And essentially it's the kind of insurance service office type of policy. And it's a standard policy that's going to exist for most companies. And it's going to say, this is what's covered, this is what's not covered. And what's your time period for being covered? How are you going to be reimbursed? And you also see something called a manuscript policy. That's a custom policy. And generally you're dealing with larger, more complex businesses that have something like that in place that negotiated the terms of the policy. Versus, again, a small business that might just say, give me the standard policy. What can you give me but the best terms? And they're going to have a similar type of policy language in them.
Okay.
It's a little more costly to draft and determine what your damage might be. But the key thing for someone in our role is to understand the policy language that's in there and how does it impact what the damages are. So realizing that there are a number of these cases that may have almost the same type of language, but there's going to be a couple that are specialized in those manuscript policies that you need to understand.
Kerrie, what are the two methods of calculating business interruption claims, and do they yield the same results?
Yes, well, first you have the net income method, which is going to be your bottom-up approach. And then you're going to have your gross profit method, which is also called the top-down approach. And with the net income method, you're starting at the bottom-up approach. You're taking your net income, you're adding back you're minusing out the variable expenses and then adding the extra expenses. And with the gross profit method, you're going to be taking the gross revenues, minusing out the continuing expenses and adding the extra expenses. And yes, these two will give you the same number. It's just two different approaches. And during the webinars that are coming up, we go really in depth in what goes into their calculations, because they are calculated differently, but they do give you the same number at the end. It just is two different approaches to calculating the losses.
Sure. Robert, what are the loss periods typically seen in these types of engagements?
So they will depend on the type of policy that you have. Generally, if you're going to put a time to it, it's usually about a year or 12 months, but it comes down to something called the period of restoration. And that's the time period that's going to take for a company to get up and running and get back to what they should be normally operating. Depending on the type of policy you have in place, it may say it's a maximum of 12 months unless you're operating earlier. It could be something that's set up where you have an agreed dollar limit, where it could go on for a while, but you have a monthly limit of what that dollar amount may be. Or it could be something that goes on a little longer, where you have an agreed maximum limit and say, we're going to cover you up to, say, $1 million. And however long it takes to get to that point, as long as you haven't gone over that $1 million limit, it could be a little longer than a year, but generally you're dealing with a 12-month period, unless some sort of extended business income loss period, typically 30 to 60 days, is added onto it.
Kerrie, is there any period of time not covered by the insurance policy from the date of the loss until the business is back to normal operations?
Yes, and this is one thing that, especially for people just starting out, it's important to know there's a waiting period. Most every policy is going to have a waiting period. And that's going to be at the very beginning, at the date of the loss. Usually it could be 24 hours, 48 hours, or 72 hours. So talking about the policies, it's really important to understand the policies, to know the waiting period when calculating the losses, to be sure that you know if you have a 24, 48, or 72-hour waiting period, that is not going to be covered by the insurance policy.
These are excellent questions. Robert, what is the difference between business income and extra expense?
So that's a really important distinction. So when we're doing our damage calculation, typically you're looking at what's the lost business income for the company over that period of time, the period of restoration. And that's really the lost actual business income that they would have had if not for the damage that occurred. And that's true business income. And it's considering the expenses that may be there. So maybe because they have no revenue, but they actually have expenses still in place. So you're going to have to deduct that and figure out what the reimbursement is there. Or it could be just they would have had 100,000 more in sales and a net business income of 30,000. That's the traditional sense. There's some calculation parts to it, but the extra expense is different. And a lot of people mix these two up. The extra expense are the expenses you need to incur to be up and running faster. So it may be covered by your policy. Some policies don't have extra expense coverage. A good example of this extra expense is if you have an office that was destroyed due to some sort of natural disaster, and the fastest way you can be operating again is to lease another office in the meantime and start up operations. That extra expense coverage may pay the new lease or rent for you to get up and running or buy new equipment to get moving again. That's not considered business income, but it is covered in some of the policies.
What are the top 3 things, Kerrie, to make sure you do for each business interruption engagement?
One thing at the very beginning, I really highly suggest, and it's very important, is get a copy of the insurance policy and also get a copy of the declaration page. And even if you've done 100 of these, 1,000 of these, every policy is going to have its little nuances. So it is very important that you read each policy. You know, from the declaration page is very important, but read each policy because everybody's going to have their individualized coverage. So that would be the first most important thing that I would say. Next, communication. Sorry, go ahead, Brian.
No, that's a great, start with the foundation of the policy itself to know what you're working with. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes, if you don't have that, you don't know what to include and not include. Secondly, I'm going to say communication is key. Communication is key with both the public adjuster, insurance adjuster, the attorney, and also with the insured. Because a lot of times there's going to be delays, and delays are not going to be the fault of the insured, and maybe the construction company ordering supplies or whatever it may be. There may be delays. So communicating this with the insurance company or the public adjuster is going to make a big difference in giving them the heads up and making sure that they're okay with a longer period of time, because as Robert said, there could be time limits on the policy, such as 12 months or whatever, and this may impact that. So communication is key. As long as you're in good communication with the insured, and they're going to be the ones that are going to let you know if there's delays, and with the insurance company or the public adjuster, then things should work out. They're very easy to work with as long as they know what's going on. Thirdly, I'm going to say it's very important. Do not act as a public adjuster or an attorney. This is not your role. You can get yourself in a lot of trouble by doing this. You need to make sure that you're working with a licensed public adjuster, the insurance company, or an attorney. These are the things that's really important. I can't stress enough. Some people don't know and think, hey, we'll just skip the middleman. But in some states, every states have their different laws. You can get into quite a bit of trouble, fines, problems with your license. And just kind of an add-on, there was 3, but an add-on is cause and effect. Make sure that when you're doing your damage analysis or lost profits calculations, that you have the correct cause and effect, that the damages are a direct effect of the event itself and not a subsequent event. So it has to be a direct correlation between the two.
Got it. Any comments to add to that, Robert?
Yes, I would definitely add, those are all excellent. And to add on to the communication piece, that's a really important part of what we do, and also what we need to make sure the client, regardless of who we're working with, is communicating. Kerrie, you made an excellent point about if there's a delay, make sure everybody's aware of it. I know earlier I talked about the concept of the period of restoration, which is the time period until normal operations should start again. If the insurance company thinks that people are delaying, they can calculate their own period of restoration that says you should have been done by this point in time, and they'll cut off the funds at that point, even if you're not back to normal operations. So having those communications, having things in place so people realize the delays aren't the insured's fault and that things are done the way they're supposed to be done, it's incredibly important because people are willing to work with you, but they want to make sure that things are being done correctly.
We also have some questions. Were you going to add something there, Kerrie?
Oh no, I was agreeing with Robert.
Okay. We've got a question here from an attendee, and it is, in March of 2019, much of Southern Oregon was hit by an unusual ice and snowstorm that lasted over 2 weeks and shut many businesses down that had no electricity. I have a restaurant business, and I am valuing that uses a fiscal reporting timeline. The question is, to normalize the lost profits as a non-recurring event, how far back should I review previous financials for the same time period the business was closed? Do I use an average or median value? It's a pretty specific question. What would be your guidance there?
So I think I hate to say it depends, which is always in our
Always.
But it depends on the quality. Yeah, it depends on the quality of the data and what you have. And also if the company was going through any sort of fluctuations like leading up to the event. If you have a company that's been doing the same thing every single year with the same results, you don't need to go back as far, and using an average or median may not make a difference. If a company that was in a growth spurt or something major happened, a one-time event, that could change whether you use a median or an average. We want to remove some of those one-time spikes, figure out what's a reasonable representation of what was actually happening. So I hate to say I can't give you an accurate answer, so you should always use a median or or me or whatever it may be. Mm-hmm. you need to look at the facts and circumstances. And if you think you can reasonably rely on the information that's provided and say that this is a good representation of what would have happened, that's the best thing you should look at. And whether it means 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, make sure you have a good representation of what would have happened during that point in time.
Mm-hmm. Anything to add?
Yeah, I would just add on to that, especially because I think they mentioned it's a cyclical thing, especially with restaurants. You're going to have your peak period parts of the year, and you're going to have your period times of the year when there's less. So if you can, I would really go back as far, like 3 to 5 years would be my ideal amount of time to go back, but 3 to 5 years, if you could go back and kind of like see that cycle of the ups and downs. And for in February, I believe it was February you said it was. So if you can see in February, this is what it is, January, February, March. And if it's pretty consistent throughout, then I would probably average those out. So I would probably say 3 to 5 years. Depending, as I said, how good the quality of data is, but you really want to just see the cyclical changes instead of looking at the whole year as well. I mean, you want to look at the whole year, but you want to see for that time period, what is the normal revenues. So,
any success stories or case studies or quick examples working with clients that you might share with those who are watching, considering getting into this, and how you've benefited your clients from this kind of service? Just a little bit of a personal and actual perspective here to share.
So I know we've dealt on some of these cases in the past where there could be some significant impacts to clients. You hope that these are pretty minimal and it's not going to be a major change. Mm-hmm. I know I had one where there was a fire and a company had pretty much just started up, and this was an owner that was looking to, it was a restaurant, and they were putting everything into trying to start up this company, and a fire happened pretty much right before they opened, and didn't have money to restart. So trying to work with them to try and figure out the best way to get some sort of reimbursement, which I'm sure Kerrie can agree here is almost impossible when you're talking about a company that hasn't started and you have no idea what they're going to do. But typically there's some background there. You could say you got a bank loan, and did you get projections to the bank of what you thought you were going to do? So you have some sort of reliable data that you can work from, even though there isn't a history of operations. But having a situation like that where you can help somebody get some sort of recovery so that they can kind of move into their dream job or whatever they were trying to do when they feel like all is lost. It's always something that's so damaging in the sense that it completely shut down, but sometimes you get those cases and you want to get somebody back on their feet, and it's always nice to be able to assist with that.
Yes, and I would add, we always think we're focusing a lot, and our webinar also focuses a lot on natural disasters. Sometimes there's individual things that happen. For example, I had a case where it was somebody who stored arts, antiques, movie prop things for the very people that high net worth people, and so she stored them, and there was a leak in her storage place, her facility, and she had told the owner, there's a small little leak, you need to fix that. Never got done. All of a sudden, boom, one day she came in, everything was destroyed. It was flooded in there. So, and not only did she lose the actual items, but this was her business, and people entrusted her with very valuable items. There was another component to it of not just getting her to another place. Sure, yeah, she could have another store or another place to operate, but that doesn't change the fact that people now don't have the trust in her, and getting that reputation back and getting that back. So sometimes there's other components that go in there that are a little bit less financial, a little bit more difficult to calculate. So there's just to be aware that there's a lot of unique things in this field, not just the natural disasters, but you really need to have an understanding of the business and of the insurance policy.
Right.
So go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just adding on because I know you had also asked just opportunity-wise. We'll hit on this in the webinar, but there are a lot of opportunities for people that want to get into this field. There's a lot of work. I hate to say that because it's usually something bad happened, but people need financial experts to assist in these cases, and there's many opportunities. One I know we'll hit on in the webinar series, but we didn't talk about much today, but some of the the web cyber crimes and things like that, and some of the interruption claims that come from those. And there's a lot of opportunity for people that are in this evolving field to decide they do want to go this route.
That was going to actually be my question, is the opportunities there for folks to get into this kind of work, and to your point, there are several. So the core, just to hit it real quickly on some of the core concepts you'll cover in the webinar series. It's coming up October 14th to 17th. And for those of you who are viewing this, you are able to take 10% off the registration fee for this upcoming webinar series. It will soon also be an on-demand course where you can buy on demand for continuing professional education. But talk a bit about some of the highlights of what folks will learn and gain from this webinar series.
So I know Kerrie and I are going to kind of take some turns on and off with the various days and then teach together the last day. But I know we spent some time going through what the policies show, what you need to look for, the key language, how to interpret it, the period of restoration, what the time period for damages are. I believe, Kerrie, you go through an actual case study of how to do a calculation of the damages. And I know we also spent some time talking about these opportunities and ways that you can get into this field and really be successful. Do you have anything else, Kerrie?
No, I'd say really much, we kind of touched on a lot of topics today. We have one full day just in understanding the insurance policy, one full day on the process of the engagement. So there's a lot of things that we will go really in depth on during the series. That's how complex and complicated and how much there really is to know, that each area needs its own way to do. And also the opportunity is really incredible out there, especially now with the cyber crime. So we kind of touched on things like the methods of doing it, the policy, what to do, but we really go in depth on these things during the week of the webinar. Great.
Well, again, the Business Interruptions and Lost Profits webinar series will be held October 14th to 18th. You can visit the website at thecti.com/BILP, which is Business Interruptions, Lost Profits, to see more of the learning objectives and description of the individual course titles. When you register for this course using the promotion code YouTube BILP, you can take a 10% discount off the registration. Thank you both, Kerrie and Robert, for joining us for this installment of YouTube Live, talking about this area of opportunity for members of the association and other valuation and forensic practitioners to get into this area. We appreciate your time and your expertise, and thank you all for joining us. We'll see you next time.